On the bustling planet of Kalara, a glittering city filled with alien races from across the galaxy, Jonas Rook stood out like a star in a sea of countless constellations. He was a human, a rare sight among the many powerful and exotic species that roamed the galactic capital. Jonas was no diplomat, and he certainly wasn't here by choice. He had come to attend the annual Galactic Peace Summit, his mission simple: to observe and report. His job as a soldier of Earth's Galactic Union didn't demand he understand alien politics, but when he entered the Great Hall, filled with delegates from all corners of the galaxy, he had no idea that everything was about to change. The room was a spectacle of colors and lights, filled with beings of every size, shape, and hue imaginable. Most of the delegates were standing in small groups, discussing matters of trade, defense, and the delicate balance of peace that held their galaxy together. The hum of chatter filled the air, but it was the sudden silence that caught Jonas's attention. A figure had entered the room, a striking alien with fiery orange skin, dark purple hair, and glowing golden eyes that seemed to pierce through the crowd. Azure, princess of the Ziltheri people, was an imposing sight. As the heir to the Ziltheri throne, her presence commanded respect. Yet, as she made her way into the hall, her eyes locked onto Jonas, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jonas had always been the observer, used to watching from the sidelines. But when Azure's gaze found him, something inside him stirred. His pulse quickened, his body suddenly aware of her presence. Azure, too, felt the strange pull toward him. She had heard of humans, of course, but never had she encountered one like Jonas. His dark hair, strong build, and determined eyes seemed to reflect a depth she had never seen before. But what truly caught her off guard was the sensation that coursed through her the moment their gazes met. It wasn't just attraction. It was something more, something ancient and primal, something that neither of them could explain. Azure's breath hitched, and her heart raced in a way it had never had before. A powerful wave of heat surged through her body, overwhelming her senses. The Ziltheri were known for their control over their biology, their mental discipline, and their physical strength, but nothing in her long training had prepared her for this. This was something outside of her understanding, something human. Azura quickly looked away, feeling a flush rise on her face. She tried to push the sensation aside, but it lingered deep inside her. This reaction, she knew, was dangerous. Her people had long believed that the Ziltheri and humans were not meant to mix. There were old myths, warnings passed down for generations, that spoke of the consequences of a Ziltheri and human union. It was said that such an event would awaken a powerful force, one that could either elevate the Ziltheri to unimaginable heights or destroy them completely. Jonas, unaware of the gravity of the situation, watched as Azure moved deeper into the hall, trying to regain her composure. He could feel the tension in the air, a strange connection between them that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just physical. It was as if their very souls had brushed against each other, creating a bond that neither of them could ignore. He tried to shake it off, to focus on the summit, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. The silence stretched, and the feeling between them only grew stronger. Azure's instincts screamed at her to leave, to remove herself from the room. But something else, something that she couldn't understand, kept her rooted in place. Her body, her mind, everything inside her was rebelling against the alien force that was now coursing through her veins. She needed to escape, but she didn't know how. She couldn't show weakness, not here, not in front of so many powerful leaders. As she took another step forward, her knees nearly buckled. The heat inside her was growing, and she feared that if she didn't get control, something unimaginable would happen. Azure excused herself quietly, slipping away into a corridor just outside the hall. But even as she tried to escape, she knew that she couldn't escape what had just begun. Her fate, and perhaps the fate of her entire people, was now intertwined with Jonas Rook, the human soldier who had unknowingly set something into motion that could not be stopped. Jonas, still standing in the hall, was left confused, wondering if he had imagined the entire thing. He glanced around, trying to find something to distract him, but his mind was still locked on the alien princess and the strange, inexplicable pull he felt toward her. Neither of them knew it yet, but the galaxy's future was about to change. And it all began with a single glance. Azure paced quickly through the corridors of the Galactic Summit's complex, her heart pounding in her chest. She had barely managed to slip away from the gathering without anyone noticing, but even now, she couldn't escape the overwhelming sensation that had overtaken her. The heat coursing through her body felt like fire, burning from the inside out. She had always prided herself on her self-control. Zilthari were known for it. But now she felt completely powerless. The moment she had locked eyes with Jonas Rook, something inside her had broken free, and now there was no going back. She couldn't understand what was happening. Zilthari women were never supposed to feel this way. Their biology was far more advanced than that of many other species, and their minds were trained to resist such distractions. But when she had looked at Jonas, something primal stirred deep within her. It was like a switch had been flipped, and now her body was demanding attention. She had been taught that such reactions were impossible for Zilthari, that no outside force could stir such deep instincts. But Jonas was different. His presence alone seemed to have unlocked something in her. Azure leaned against the cold wall of the hallway, trying to steady her breathing. She closed her eyes, trying to calm the turmoil raging within her, but it was no use. The heat was building, spreading through her with a force she couldn't control. She had never felt anything like it before. It was as if her body was betraying her, pushing her toward an impossible need that she wasn't ready to face. She cursed under her breath, feeling her own body turn against her. There was no way she could go back into that room, not when she was struggling so fiercely to keep herself together. No one, least of all her people, could know that something was wrong. As the future ruler of the Zilthari, she was expected to be perfect, composed, and unshakable. Her people looked to her for guidance, for strength. But here she was, trembling with an undeniable longing for someone she had only just met. The more she tried to push the feelings away, the stronger they became. It was as though her very biology was pushing her toward Jonas, and every thought she had was now focused on him. His strong frame, his deep brown eyes, the way his lips had slightly curved in a smile when they first met. Every detail was etched into her mind. She hated how much she wanted him, how deeply she felt this attraction. It went against everything she had been taught. The Zilthari did not let their emotions control them. They ruled them. Yet here she was, fighting against an overwhelming force that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Azure finally sank to her knees, feeling the intense heat sear through her. She couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. There was no way she could handle this alone. She had heard whispers about humans before, how their presence affected certain alien species in unexpected ways. But nothing had prepared her for this. Her mind raced. If the heat was truly linked to a human presence, then what did that mean for her people? For the future of the galaxy, the ancient prophecies had warned of a powerful union between a Zilthari royal and a human, but Azure had dismissed them as myths, stories to frighten children. But now, in the middle of a galaxy on the brink of peace, she found herself questioning everything. She didn't have the luxury of time. She couldn't allow herself to be lost in this sensation, not when so much was at stake. There were factions within the galaxy that would do anything to control the Zilthari throne, to take advantage of her vulnerability. Azure knew that her sudden, uncontrollable reaction to Jonas could not be ignored. If word got out about what had happened, it could shatter the fragile peace that the galaxy had been trying to build. Worse yet, it could tear her people apart. With a deep breath, Azure pushed herself back to her feet. She couldn't stay here, not like this. She had to regain control of her body, her emotions, and the situation at hand. But the path ahead was unclear. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. How could she keep her power and her control when her body was betraying her, when her heart beat faster at the mere thought of Jonas. But even as she made her way toward the nearest exit, the answer was already beginning to form in the back of her mind. She knew she had to find Jonas again. She had to confront what was happening between them, whether she was ready for it or not. And as much as she wanted to resist, a part of her couldn't. As she stepped into the cooler night air of Kalara's outer city, Azure tried to steady herself. The city lights flickered in the distance, but it felt like everything around her had gone dark. She had always been a princess, always in control, but tonight she was something else. A woman caught between destiny and desire. Jonas stood at the balcony of the summit complex, gazing out over the vibrant cityscape of Kalara. The streets below were alive with activity, alien vehicles darting in and out of traffic, while towering buildings blinked with neon lights. But Jonas wasn't focused on the city. His mind was occupied with something, or someone, he couldn't quite shake. Azure, the Zilthari princess, had left the summit abruptly after their brief encounter, and ever since, he felt a strange tension hanging in the air. It was as if something had shifted, but he had no idea what it meant. His mind kept drifting back to her golden eyes, the way she had looked at him in the hall. The moment their gazes had met, an unspoken connection had passed between them. It wasn't just attraction. It felt like something more, something deeper, as if their souls had recognized each other in a way that words couldn't explain. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, even now. It wasn't just physical, though that part was undeniably strong. It was the way she had looked at him, with a mix of curiosity, strength, and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. Jonas didn't understand what had happened. He had encountered many alien species in his travels, but never had he felt something like this before. His mission on Kalara was to observe the summit, take notes, and report back to Earth's Galactic Union. But now, everything felt complicated. He had never imagined that a chance meeting with a single alien princess could have this effect on him. But the more he tried to focus on his duties, the more his thoughts wandered back to Azure. Suddenly, his communicator buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up quickly, hoping it was something that could distract him from his growing confusion. It was his superior officer, Captain Alda Voss, a no-nonsense leader who always had a plan. "Rook," Alda's voice crackled through the communicator. "We've received an urgent message from the Zilthari. It seems there's been an incident. We need you to report to the embassy immediately." Jonas's heart skipped a beat. The Zilthari. He glanced down at the communicator in his hand. The request seemed innocent enough, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. He was meant to be an observer, not a participant in their internal affairs. But after his brief interaction with Azure, something told him that his role on Kalara had just become far more complicated than he'd anticipated. "I'll be there right away, Captain," Jonas responded, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. What had happened? Was Azure involved? He couldn't help but wonder. His thoughts flitted back to the princess, her sudden departure, and the strange sensation that had surged through him when their eyes met. He made his way quickly to the Zilthari embassy, trying to push his growing curiosity aside. As he entered the embassy's imposing gates, he noticed that the atmosphere was tense. Guards moved with purpose, and the usual calm demeanor of the Zilthari was replaced with a sense of urgency. Inside, Captain Alda was waiting for him, her arms crossed, a stern look on her face. "Rook, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but I have orders to bring you in on this," Alda said, her voice low. "Something's happening with the Zilthari princess. They say she's ill, but there's something else, something they're not telling us. They haven't been clear on the details, but it seems her condition is worsening," Alda continued. "You've got some history with the Zilthari, right? Maybe you can get them to talk to you. I'll follow your lead, but we need to figure this out quickly. If something's going on with their princess, it could be bigger than we realize." Jonas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't like the sound of this. He had no idea what was going on with Azure, but the urgency in Alda's voice was unmistakable. He wasn't about to let this go without finding out more. If there was a chance that Azure was in trouble, he wouldn't stand by and do nothing. "I'll do what I can," Jonas said, determination settling into his chest. "But I need to speak with the princess. She's the key to all of this." Jonas didn't care about the danger. If Azure was truly in trouble, he wasn't going to sit idly by. He had to get to the bottom of this. As he stepped deeper into the embassy, he couldn't help but think about the strange connection he felt with her. Was this more than just a coincidence? And what did it mean for the galaxy if their destinies were truly intertwined? He couldn't answer those questions yet, but he was determined to find out. As he walked down the hallway, the weight of what was to come settled heavily on his shoulders. This was only the beginning, and Jonas knew that nothing would be the same after this moment. Whatever was happening, he was about to be dragged into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Jonas walked through the corridors of the Zilthari embassy, his mind racing. The air felt thicker here, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. His thoughts kept drifting back to Azure, how she had disappeared from the summit so suddenly, the strange way her body had reacted when they first met. The urgency of her situation was beginning to weigh heavily on him. He had to find out what was going on with her, and fast. The Zilthari weren't a species that showed weakness, so for her to be in such a state meant something far more dangerous was at play. As Jonas approached a large, heavily guarded door at the end of the hallway, he noticed the tension in the air. The guards standing at attention were focused, their eyes scanning every movement. Something wasn't right. The normally serene, controlled nature of the Zilthari had been replaced with a sense of unease. The quiet murmur of voices could be heard from behind the door, but it was impossible to make out any words. Whatever was happening behind it was being kept under strict confidentiality. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're here," Captain Alda said, her voice stern as always. She had followed him down the hall, her military posture unwavering. "This is the room. They're waiting for you." Jonas nodded, but his gaze lingered on the door. There was something unsettling about the entire situation. If Azure truly was ill, why wasn't there more information? Why were the guards so tense? Why had the Zilthari people, who were so private about their affairs, suddenly opened up to Earth's galactic union to get help? It all didn't add up. "I don't like this," Jonas muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Alda or to himself. "We're in too deep already," Alda replied, her voice calm but filled with concern. "Whatever is going on, we need to figure it out before it gets worse." Jonas took a deep breath and stepped forward, his hand hovering over the door's touchpad. His heart rate quickened, and a strange feeling of foreboding washed over him. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. There was something personal at stake here. Azure had already affected him in ways he hadn't expected, and now he was being dragged deeper into the heart of something that could change the course of the galaxy. The door slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a large room bathed in soft blue light. At the center of the room, lying on a bed, was Azure. She looked pale, her glowing golden eyes half-lidded, as if she were in a deep trance. Several Zilthari medical officers hovered around her, their sharp, delicate features focused on monitoring her condition. They had hooked her up to various machines, but none of them seemed to bring her any relief. Her body was still fighting, but it was unclear what it was fighting against. "Azure," Jonas whispered, unable to keep the concern from his voice. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning her form. She was so still, so unlike the strong. The head of the medical team, Dr. Oren, noticed Jonas's approach and quickly stepped forward. His expression was one of controlled urgency. "We don't know what's causing this," Dr. Oren said, his voice tinged with frustration. Jonas frowned. "What do you mean, foreign?" Jonas's stomach twisted. He didn't want to consider it, but the idea was starting to form in his mind. Could it be that the strange attraction he had felt toward Azure, The way her body had reacted when they first met was tied to whatever was happening to her now. Could their connection have triggered something in her that no one, least of all her, had been prepared for? He couldn't ignore the nagging thought. It had to be connected. And if it was, what did that mean for both of them? "You think this has something to do with me?" Jonas asked, his voice quieter now. Dr. Oren didn't immediately answer, but the look in his eyes told Jonas everything he needed to know. The idea had already crossed his mind, and now it was clear that whatever was happening to Azure, it was somehow linked to him. But how? Why? Alda, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward, her face grave. "If there's any chance that what you're thinking is true, Jonas, you have to understand that it's dangerous. Whatever connection this is between you and Azure, we can't let it get out of control. If the Ziltheri find out—" "I know," Jonas interrupted, his mind already racing. He had no idea how this would all unfold, but he couldn't leave Azure like this. She was part of a much larger story now, one that had intertwined their fates in a way neither of them could have imagined. Whatever was happening, he had to figure it out, even if it meant risking everything. The mystery was just beginning, and Jonas knew that the answers would be far more complicated than he ever expected. The silence in the room felt suffocating as Jonas stared at Azure's unconscious form, still connected to the life support machines. Her golden eyes, once full of strength and resolve, now lay dull and unfocused, as if she were caught in some kind of dream or trance. The strange reaction her body had been going through only grew stronger the longer he stayed in her presence. It was as if something in the air itself was charged, pushing them closer to a fate neither of them could control. Jonas stepped closer to her, feeling a deep ache in his chest. The pull he felt toward Azure hadn't faded. In fact, it seemed to have grown stronger since he entered the room. His mind raced with questions, trying to piece together the strange connection that seemed to have taken hold of them both. Could it really be that something between them, something he couldn't even understand, was causing her body to react in such a powerful, dangerous way? As he gazed at her, he couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. He had always been able to handle challenges, had always known how to fight his way out of tight situations. But this was different. Azure wasn't just an alien princess. She was someone whose very existence had become tied to his own. And now, that connection was pushing both of them toward an unknown danger. "We need to figure out what's causing this," Jonas muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. Captain Alda, who had been standing at the doorway, stepped in, her expression hard and unreadable. "We don't have time for theories, Rook," she said sharply. "We need answers, and fast. If the Ziltheri leadership finds out that their princess is in danger, the situation could spiral out of control. You need to help us fix this." Jonas turned to face her, frustration flaring up inside him. "I'm trying, Alda, but none of this makes sense. Her body is rejecting something we don't understand. And no one seems willing to give me answers." His gaze shifted back to Azure. "I've never felt anything like this before. This connection. It's as if we're being pulled together by something stronger than ourselves." Alda's face softened for a moment, but she quickly masked her emotions. "Look, I know this is tough, but we're running out of time. If you're right, and your connection to Azure is the cause of this, then we need to find a way to sever it before it's too late. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes." Jonas clenched his fists. He didn't want to sever anything. The idea of walking away from Azure, of abandoning her in her time of need, felt wrong, deep down in his bones. But he couldn't ignore Alda's words. If there was any chance that their connection was killing her, he couldn't afford to be selfish. But what if there was another way? What if their bond didn't have to be severed, but understood and controlled? Before Jonas could say anything, Dr. Oren, the head of the medical team, approached. "There may be a way to stabilize her, but it will require cooperation from both of you," he said, his tone serious but hopeful. There are ancient Ziltheri texts that speak of connections like this between a Ziltheri and another species, though they are rarely documented. If you and Azura can tap into this connection willingly, rather than fighting it, there may be a way to reverse the damage and prevent it from becoming fatal. Jonas blinked, his heart pounding in his chest. You're saying that if we work together, we could fix this? Jonas turned back to Azure, his mind swirling with the possibilities. Synchronizing energies. It sounded absurd, like something out of a strange legend. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. But could he really do it? Could he control something so powerful, something so deeply tied to Azure's very being? The idea of getting even closer to her, of sharing something so intimate, was both terrifying and alluring. As if sensing his hesitation, Dr. Oren spoke again. Time is running out. The longer Azure's body fights this connection, the more unstable she becomes. You must decide. You're the only one who can help her. Jonas's heart raced. He had no choice. There was no other option. He couldn't let Azure slip away. Not when he was the only one who had any chance of saving her. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had no idea what he was about to do, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Azure face this alone. I'll do it, Jonas said, his voice filled with determination. I'll help her, no matter what it takes. Alda looked at him, her face serious. Be careful, Rook. If either of you fail, the consequences won't just be personal. It could change everything. Jonas nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The fate of Azura, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was now in his hands. Jonas paced back and forth in the sterile, quiet room, his thoughts racing faster than his feet. He had just made the decision to try and help Azure, but the weight of that choice was heavier than he had anticipated. The plan Dr. Oren had outlined was risky, a last-ditch effort to stabilize Azure's condition before it worsened beyond repair. But it was the only option they had left. If the connection between them was the cause of her strange condition, then they needed to tap into it, not fight it. But could he really control something so intense, so foreign? His mind kept circling back to the moments he had shared with Azure, the first time their eyes had met, how an almost electric pulse shot through his chest. The connection was undeniable, but was it enough to save her? Was he even strong enough for something so immense? Turning his attention back to Azure, he walked slowly to her side. She lay there, still unconscious, connected to various machines that beeped softly, indicating her heart rate, but they offered no real answers. Her once glowing skin now appeared pale, and her golden eyes, usually filled with strength, were clouded, distant. It broke his heart to see her like this, so vulnerable, so unlike the powerful woman he had first encountered. He could feel the pull to her, like an invisible thread tying their fates together. The thought of losing her, of leaving her in her current state, was unbearable. Jonas sat down on the edge of her bed, carefully brushing a strand of her silver-blue hair from her forehead. He had to trust in his connection to her, had to believe that it wasn't just some strange cosmic fluke. If there was a chance that their bond could save her, he had to take it. As he focused on Azure, trying to push aside the lingering doubts that crowded his thoughts, he felt a subtle change in the air. It was like a ripple, a gentle pull that seemed to emanate from her. His pulse quickened as he realized that the connection was no longer just something he felt on the surface. It was deeper, more profound than he could have ever imagined. It was as though the very fabric of his being was aligning with hers, like two pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the rhythm of Azure's breathing and the steady beat of his own heart. It was like they were the only two beings in the universe, bound together in a way that words couldn't explain. His hand hovered over her skin, trembling with uncertainty. He knew this was no small decision. It wasn't just about her survival. It was about something much more. As his hand made contact with hers, a strange warmth spread through his fingertips, up his arm, and into his chest. The sensation was electric, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if it was his own energy responding to hers or if something far deeper was happening. But whatever it was, it felt like a truth he couldn't deny. Jonas leaned forward, whispering her name. Azura. There was no response at first, but then he felt a slight pressure on his hand. It was subtle, like a faint spark of life returning to her. Her fingers moved, curling slightly around his. It was as if she were waking up, but not fully. The connection between them seemed to grow stronger, the invisible thread linking their minds. Jonas could almost hear her voice in his mind, though there were no words, just an overwhelming sense of presence. She was still there, still fighting. A low hum filled the air, and Jonas opened his eyes, startled by the sound. The machines monitoring her were now emitting a soft, steady tone, signaling that her condition was stabilizing. Her breathing had deepened, and the pallor of her skin seemed to have softened, replaced by a faint glow. Jonas's heart skipped a beat as he realized that the connection between them was working. Slowly, painfully, she was coming back. But just as quickly, the calm was shattered. A sharp, piercing cry echoed through the room, and Azure's body jerked violently. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with an intense golden light. It wasn't the same calm energy from before. It was raw, frantic. Her body trembled, and Jonas could feel the force of her emotions flooding into him. It was overwhelming, like waves crashing against his mind. For a moment, there was nothing but chaos, a swirling storm of thoughts and emotions crashing against him. But then, something shifted. The energy between them began to settle, the waves calming into a steady rhythm. Azure's voice, soft but clear, echoed in his mind. "Thank you." Jonas held her hand tighter, not sure if it was his own relief or her gratitude that made his heart race. But he knew one thing for certain. They had made it through the storm together. The bond between them wasn't just a curse, it was their strength. And now, they had to face whatever came next, together. The room was quiet, but the tension in the air was thick. Jonas sat by Azure's side, his hand still gently holding hers, feeling the lingering warmth of their connection. He was still trying to process everything that had just happened. The connection between them had grown stronger than he ever expected, and Azure was now slowly coming back to herself. Her breathing had steadied, and the golden glow in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a calm, almost serene expression. But there was still something lingering in the air, a feeling that they were standing on the edge of something huge, something that neither of them fully understood. Azure turned her head slightly toward him, her lips curling into a small, grateful smile. "You saved me," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of wonder and disbelief. Jonas gave her a tired smile in return, but there was no denying the intensity of the bond between them. He had felt the pull, the way it seemed to tie their fates together. And now, as much as he had tried to push it aside, it was clear that this connection wasn't something they could ignore. It was real, undeniable, and it had already started to shape their future in ways they hadn't anticipated. "You didn't need saving," Jonas replied, though his voice was filled with uncertainty. "I was just trying to help, but I never expected it to be like this. There's something between us, Azure, something I can't explain." Azure's golden eyes locked with his, her gaze unwavering. She didn't seem scared or confused, as if she had known something like this would happen all along. "I felt it, too," she said, her voice calm but full of an energy that sent a chill down his spine. "The bond between us is not just an accident, Jonas. It's something the universe has brought us together for. You and I, we're meant to be." Jonas stared at her, his mind racing. The words she spoke were heavy, more than just a declaration. It was as though she knew something about their connection that he didn't. He had heard of things like this before, fabled bonds between people that transcended time, space, and reason, but he had never thought it could be real. He had never thought it could happen to him. Before Jonas could speak, the door to the room slid open, and Captain Alda stepped in, her stern face filled with concern. She took a quick glance at Azure, then turned her eyes to Jonas. "Is she all right?" she asked, her voice tense but controlled. "She's stabilizing," Jonas answered, glancing back at Azure, who now sat up, her strength returning. "But there's something else happening. A bond. Between us. I don't know how to explain it, but it's not just physical. It's deeper than that." Alda's eyes flickered with both curiosity and caution. "I was afraid of this," she muttered, walking over to where Jonas sat. "The Zilthari have always been a species of deep emotion and powerful connections. But this is different. A bond like what you're describing can be dangerous. If you're not careful, it could tear both of you apart." Azure shifted slightly, her gaze now focused on Captain Alda. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly, but there was an edge to her voice. "I understand the risks, but I also understand the potential. Together, we can accomplish things no one else can." Jonas looked between the two of them, his mind swirling with everything they had said. He had never been one for destiny, never believed in fate guiding his life. But now, with Azure sitting beside him and their bond pulsing with an energy he couldn't ignore, he had to admit that something larger than himself was at play here. "I can't deny it," Jonas said, standing up slowly. "There's something between us, and maybe, just maybe, we can use that to change everything. But how? How do we make sense of this? How do we use it to help everyone?" Azure's eyes shone with a renewed sense of purpose. "We do what we've always done. Fight. We fight together." Jonas couldn't help but feel a surge of determination at her words. The gravity of the situation weighed on him, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized she was right. This bond, whatever it was, could change the course of history, but they needed to be careful. Captain Alda, sensing the shift in the room, nodded gravely. "You both understand what you're saying, right? The fate of millions could depend on your ability to master this bond. It's not just a connection between two people, it's a link that could shape the future of entire civilizations." Jonas met Azure's gaze, and for a moment, he felt a deep sense of resolve. They had come this far together, and now they would face the challenges ahead as one. There was no going back. Their bond was more than just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of something much larger than they had ever imagined. Together, they would change the course of the galaxy. The days that followed were a blur of activity, and Jonas could hardly keep up. The bond between him and Azure was growing stronger with each passing moment, pulling them closer to a destiny neither of them had fully understood. They spent long hours working with Captain Alda, strategizing and planning their next move. There was no doubt that the galaxy was in turmoil. Wars were spreading like wildfire, and the fragile alliances between planets were breaking down. But Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that the connection he shared with Azure was the key to bringing it all to an end. The weight of their situation was not lost on Azure either. Her once calm demeanor had shifted. There was a fire in her eyes now, a determination that Jonas had not seen before. As they sat together in the war room, the air heavy with tension, Azure turned to him. "Jonas, we can't waste any more time. The factions are closing in on the capital, and the peace talks are failing. It's up to us to stop them." Jonas nodded, feeling the full weight of her words. He had never been a soldier, never imagined he would be leading an army. But with Azure by his side, he felt as if he could take on anything. The bond between them was more than just emotional. It was a force that seemed to fuel him, sharpen his mind, and give him strength when he thought he had none left. "We have to bring the leaders together," Jonas said, his voice steady but full of resolve. "We can't allow the galaxy to fall into chaos. We'll gather them, convince them to join forces, and if they refuse, we'll make them understand that unity is the only way forward." Azure met his gaze, her golden eyes flashing with a fierce intensity. "I believe we can do this," she said, her voice full of conviction. "But we must move quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to stop the war." Captain Alda, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "You're both right, but we must also be cautious. There are those who will try to manipulate this bond between you for their own gain. The power you have together is extraordinary, but if it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything." Jonas and Azare exchanged a glance. They had known the risks, but hearing Alda put it so plainly made the reality hit even harder. Their bond wasn't just a gift, it was a weapon, and there were those who would stop at nothing to control it. "We'll be careful," Azare said, her voice soft but firm. "But we can't let fear control us. The galaxy needs us now more than ever." Jonas agreed, though his mind was filled with a mixture of doubt and determination. He wasn't sure if they were ready for what was coming, but he knew they had no choice but to try. He had seen the way Azare's strength and resolve had grown since they first met, and he knew that she was right. They were the galaxy's last hope. As the plan took shape, Jonas and Azare traveled across the galaxy, visiting the major factions, trying to convince their leaders to put aside their differences and unite against the growing threat. Some were willing to listen, others were not. It was a dangerous game they played, but they were driven by a shared belief that the galaxy could be saved. One of their most difficult encounters came with Lord Varnock, the ruthless leader of a war-torn system. His reputation for cruelty was known across the stars, and his disdain for diplomacy was legendary. But when Jonas and Azare stood before him, they could feel the weight of the moment. The air between them was thick with tension as Lord Varnock sneered at the idea of peace. "You think you can stop this war with words." Azare stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. "You underestimate us," she said, her voice cold but full of authority. "We are stronger than you think. And together, we are unstoppable." Varnock laughed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. He had underestimated Azare, and perhaps even Jonas, but he didn't know the full extent of their bond. If he had, he might have been more cautious. Jonas could feel the tension in the room growing, the bond between him and Azare pulsing with an intensity that made the air crackle. "This is about the future of the galaxy. You can either stand with us and be part of something greater, or you can continue to fight and destroy everything you fought for." It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. Jonas and Azare had managed to gain an ally, albeit a reluctant one. But they knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but they couldn't afford to stop now. The storm was gathering, and the only way to survive it was together. As they left Varnock's war room, Jonas couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The bond between him and Azare was more than just a connection, it was their strength. And together, they were building the foundation of a new future. The moment of truth had arrived. Jonas, Azare, and their small but determined group had gathered on the outer rim of the capital system. Their allies had slowly grown, one leader at a time, but time was running out. The war was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. Now all they had to do was convince the final faction, the most powerful one, before the entire galaxy spiraled into irreparable chaos. They had no more time for diplomacy. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with tension as the final battle drew closer. Jonas stood on the bridge of their ship, staring out into the vastness of space. He could feel the weight of the decision ahead of him, the responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. A part of him still wondered if they were truly ready for what was about to unfold. They had made progress, yes, but the biggest hurdle still lay ahead. Would the remaining factions unite, or would they crumble under the pressure? Azare approached him quietly, her footsteps soft against the metal floor. When she reached his side, she looked up at him with a mixture of understanding and determination. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked gently. Jonas didn't answer immediately. He couldn't afford to let doubt creep in, not now. Just wondering if we're really doing enough. He finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. What if we fail? What if this is all for nothing? Azaray's gaze softened. We can't think like that, Jonas. We've come too far to turn back now. We have the bond. We have the support of countless leaders who've seen what we can do together. The galaxy is ready for a new beginning. Her words grounded him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jonas took a deep breath and nodded. Azaray was right. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse, and they were the ones who had the power to shift its course. They had to succeed. Just as he turned to face her, Captain Alda's voice crackled through the intercom. Jonas, Azaray, we're approaching the final negotiation zone. The leaders are waiting. Jonas' heart skipped a beat. This was it. They were about to meet the most powerful faction, Lord Calyx and his fleet of warships. If they could win Calyx over, they would have the strength to change the galaxy's fate. If they failed, everything they had fought for would unravel. Azaray stepped up to the controls, her fingers deftly guiding their ship into the secured area where Lord Calyx's fleet awaited. The tension was palpable as the large, imposing ships loomed in the distance. It felt as though every star in the galaxy was watching them. For a moment, the weight of the situation hit Jonas harder than ever. Could they really change the mind of a man like Lord Calyx? The galaxy's last hope rested in their hands. As their ship docked, Lord Calyx appeared on the hologram, his expression unreadable. I expected you both, he said in a deep, commanding voice. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Jonas and Azaray. I hear you've gathered quite a force. But tell me, why should I join your cause? What makes you think I would risk everything for a fleeting alliance? Jonas stepped forward, meeting Calyx's gaze with the full force of his conviction. Because this isn't just about politics or power. It's about survival. If we continue to fight among ourselves, there will be nothing left. Your fleet, your people, they'll all be destroyed. The galaxy will collapse, and you'll have nothing to rule. Azaray stood beside him, her voice steady but full of intensity. The bond between us has shown us the truth. Together, we are stronger than we could ever be apart. If we unite, we can forge a new path. A path of peace, where our differences no longer divide us. You have the power to change the future, Lord Calyx. You don't have to be a part of the destruction. You can lead us into a new era. Jonas took a step forward, feeling the bond with Azaray surging between them, giving him the courage to say what needed to be said. We don't need to trust perfectly, he said, but we can work together. For the sake of the galaxy, we have to try. The old way is dying. It's time for something new. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. But then, at last, Lord Calyx's lips parted. I will give you one chance. You will have my fleet, but you must prove to me that you can follow through. The galaxy is full of broken promises. Show me you can deliver. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. The alliance had been formed. They now had the strength to unite the galaxy, to bring peace where there had only been war. As Jonas and Azaray exchanged a quiet, knowing glance, they realized that this moment, this decision, would define everything. The galaxy's future was now in their hands, and they wouldn't stop until they had brought about the change the universe so desperately needed. The final battle had come and gone, but the true work had only just begun. The galaxy, once on the brink of destruction, now stood on the edge of something new, something unprecedented. Jonas, Azaray, and their newfound allies had united the major factions, bringing peace where only conflict had existed for centuries. But the weight of leadership, of responsibility, pressed on them both. They had succeeded in avoiding disaster, but now they needed to rebuild. The real challenge lay in proving that the peace they had fought for could truly last. Jonas stood on the balcony of their new headquarters, the heart of the new government, gazing out over the vast city below. The skyline glittered with the promise of a new day, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jonas allowed himself to breathe a little easier. But even as he stared at the beautiful scene, he knew the work was far from over. The galaxy was full of old scars, and it would take time to heal. Azure joined him quietly, her presence as comforting as ever. They had both come a long way from the first time they had met, when she had been just another alien warrior, and he had been an ordinary human caught in extraordinary circumstances. Now, they were the faces of change, the ones who had sparked the revolution that would lead the galaxy into a new era. And together, they had more to prove than anyone else. "Do you think we can make it last?" Azure asked, her voice thoughtful, as if she, too, was contemplating the weight of what they had accomplished. "I know we united the factions, but there's still so much distrust. So many old enemies." Jonas turned to her, offering a small but reassuring smile. "I think we've already done something incredible. We've shown them that it's possible. The rest, that will take time. But we'll make sure they understand that peace is worth fighting for, and that unity is the only way forward." Azure nodded, her golden eyes filled with determination. She had always been strong, but there was something different in her now. The bond they shared, the one that had started as something unexpected, had turned into the glue that held everything together. They were more than just a pair. They were a symbol of the strength that came from unity, and they were determined to carry that message to every corner of the galaxy. "We've proven that we can change the future," Azure continued. "But we can't stop now. We need to keep pushing. We need to show them that this isn't just some fleeting dream. We need to show them that it's real." Jonas nodded. "You're right. And we'll be the ones to lead them there. It won't be easy, but we've come this far. Together, we can build the galaxy we've always wanted." As they stood together, looking out at the horizon, Captain Alda approached. Her expression was more relaxed than it had been in weeks, but Jonas could tell that there was still much on her mind. "The peace talks are going well," Alda said, a rare smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "The leaders are beginning to trust each other, slowly but surely." Jonas felt a surge of relief. It had taken everything they had, but it seemed like the impossible had finally become possible. The galaxy was beginning to heal, and the divisions that had once seemed insurmountable were starting to fade. But there were still many hurdles ahead. There would always be those who sought to disrupt the peace, to take power for themselves. Jonas knew that the battle wasn't over yet, but the first steps had been taken. "We'll keep pushing," Jonas said, his voice steady. "There's still a long road ahead, but we've made a start, and we're not stopping now." Azure took his hand, her grip strong, her confidence unwavering. Together, they had achieved the impossible, and now they were going to build the future they had dreamed of. No one could stop them. For the first time in a long while, Jonas felt a sense of hope, not just for himself or for Azure, but for the entire galaxy. The road ahead would be hard, and there would be many more challenges to face, but they had proven that change was possible. And together, with their bond stronger than ever, they would see it through. The new dawn of the galaxy was here, and they would ensure it lasted.